Hi, welcome, and thank you, Cincinnati Ad Club. I am so excited to talk to you guys today, and thanks so much for inviting me. It's a really fascinating and challenging time in the world of branding and media, and it's really cool to be talking to you today because I always really prefer it and get excited when I'm talking to people who I think are, in my tribe. And your jobs already require you to think about the future and anticipate and harness change. And right now, change is actually happening at a more rapid pace. Things feel very turbulent. And I wanted to take some time today to talk to you guys about why we should think more deeply about the future, why and how we can harness change and make the most of it, and why we should all try to become future fluent. I'm Valerie Jacobs, and I'm the Chief Growth Officer and Futurist at LPK. And if you are not familiar with LPK, we are a brand and innovation consultancy specialized in shaping the now, near, and next for brands and businesses. Insight and foresight are underpinning everything that we do, and we really focus on giving brands the tools to be future fluent, which helps them anticipate change and strategize their role in the future. And I've been a trend chaser and a futurist for almost 2 decades now. And foresight is really at the core of everything that I do. And about 15 years ago, I started building out the trends and foresights capability at LPK, and that's built into the practice that we have today. So, in thinking about this presentation, my job here today is really to bring the outside in, to open your minds, and to expand the possibilities. You know, Also, I feel like at this point in my career, I also am out to reframe the very notion of trend forecasting and offer my take on really where the power is in foresight. And if I'm like completely transparent, I'd like to compel everyone to actively seek to become future fluent as a potential personal skill and an organizational capability. It's something that we've never needed more. So, it's hard to start any presentation right now without acknowledging the context we're in. And I think for so many people, day to day existence is really quite challenging because it's filled with uncertainty and ambiguity and sort of a constant change. And I think for some people, even chaos. And I think that even before this all happened in early 2020, um, we were already in a point in our world that was filled with disruption, uncertainty, ambiguity. And as a society, we were already managing an enormous amount of change and disruption in commerce, experiences, and how we connect with each other. And in fact, we were already basically on a tipping point of a global anxiety epidemic. From Putin to plastic islands, things really weren't looking that good. And you think about everyone's predictions for the 21st century, and it really hasn't turned out to be flying cars or paperless offices or peace and harmony. Instead, it's traffic jams, collapsing ecosystems, mass shootings, Twitter feuds, fake news, and the list goes on. It was already exhausting and life felt pretty tough. And then we were presented in what many people in the foresight community call a black swan. Now, you may be asking yourself why I'm bringing this up in a presentation about the future, but I think it bears discussing the idea of black swans because many people feel like 2020 has basically been, I don't know, a flock of black swans in some way. And if you don't know what a black swan is, I'll just briefly share. It's an unpredictable or unforeseen event, and typically one that has extreme consequences. They're always surprises with major lasting effects, but are often inappropriately rationalized after the fact with hindsight. But as a futurist, I kind of have some other thoughts about black swans. And, people are saying the black swan was a coronavirus, but I'm asking myself, sorry, I asked myself, is the coronavirus actually a black swan? Or did some people see this coming? The same thing about other factors in 2020, like, are they pure happenstance or surprise, or were they inevitabilities? So I wanted to kind of take us back and rewind in order to answer this question. So let's go back to 2010. What was happening 10 years ago? And let's think about how it's impacted our industry since then. So in 2010, Instagram was launched. Facebook's hot feature was a status update. Fitbit launched the first modern wearable. The first Uber ride was hailed. Airbnb only had 2,500 listings versus the 6 million plus it has today. And subscription services like Birchbox or D2C brands like Warby Parker, or even Amazon Prime, having this delivery option upended commerce as we know it and kind of became e-commerce that we have today. And we dodged a bullet in 2010. I'm not sure how many people remember this, but America was dealing with a second wave of H1N1 in 2010 that ultimately resulted in millions of cases and hospitalizations and deaths, but it didn't grab our psyche, our culture, or our economy, didn't force us into this self-isolation, and just didn't have the same halting effects. So what? So in thinking about black swans and things that perhaps we didn't see coming, I propose that we could look back and see those forces of change that have upended so much about our commerce, our communities, our connections, and even our health and wellness. Because in 2010, there was no such thing as an influencer. Facebook and Google weren't advertising or shopping platforms. The modern gig economy did not exist, nor did the sharing economy. E-commerce was considered pretty niche, and certainly there weren't, services for free shipping or same-day delivery. And in the 10 years since 2010, our devices have gotten really smart. Those signals were all there in 2010, and you can see now how much they've impacted 2020. The concept of augmented reality, virtual reality, and basically so many other emerging technologies felt like science fiction back then, but now these things are actual realities in our lives. And all of this was happening against the backdrop of a pandemic. This begs the question, why weren't we prepared for these things and how they impacted our industry? So, we can't let this lack of planning slow us down. We can't let it make us think that we need to give up on the future, or it's not even worthwhile to think about the future. Because I take us back to give us an example of everything that can happen in a decade, and to remind us that we can think through the future and plan for it. We always have to be looking forward and looking at what's possible and what's next. So I say this to teach a very important lesson, that trends are about both looking back and looking forward. We can learn from the patterns of the forces from 2010, just like we can learn from the patterns of the forces that are happening right now. By learning from those patterns, we can better prepare for the future and things like COVID-19, climate change, racial unrest, and the things that will feel like black swans at some point in the future. So I propose that we can't get bogged down in something that feels like future fatigue. a sort of malaise about thinking about the future. I believe what we have to do is become future fluent. And now a lot of people are like, what does that even mean? Well, it's something that I've been thinking about for a while because I just believe that people kind of have a bad idea about what trends are. They either think they're fads or trendy, but I want to propose a new notion about this. Um, Really, what we have in our industry is we have a lot of data and a lot of trends, and we're kind of all swimming in it. It's like our inboxes are full of reports. You know, our social media feeds, everywhere we look, newspapers, everything is saying trends. We're getting statistics thrown around all the time at us. But these are really just raw information. They're just inputs, whether they're qualitative or quantitative. They really don't mean anything until you turn them into something. And that is what we do. We take data and turn it into insights, and trends are really not powerful until you turn them into foresight. That's because you have to turn these things into strategic intelligence, and for your organization, something that's proprietary knowledge. Then, when you act on that strategic insight and foresight over time and track your results, you can develop what we call future fluency. It's this higher order ability to anticipate outcomes and to act with wisdom. So you can see here that it's a capability that allows us to move from information to knowledge to wisdom. This is what I call future fluency, and I believe this is a skill that we all should possess and that we need to drive into the DNA of our organizations. And the reason we need to do that is because when you become future fluent, you can unlock potential, become more optimistic, and then strengthen your anticipation muscle. But how? So let's go back to the story I laid out a little earlier about 2010. So, what if there was a process you can initiate today that would prepare you for the next 10 years? Or let's just say right now, we need to prepare for the next, 6 months, 1 year, maybe max 2 years. And there actually is a way to do this. It's called landscape scenario planning. Now, landscape scenario planning is my favorite strategic foresight tool, to be quite honest. And it's something that has existed in our strategic toolbox for about 50 years, developed by the military and large corporations. But it's a strategic planning method that organizations use to make more flexible, long-term plans. And normally you use this methodology when you're addressing something that's about 10 years in the future. And that's because that time frame is really associated with the level of uncertainty and disruption. And it's very difficult to see that far in the future. But I think right now we have the same level of anxiety and uncertain and inability to see forward at more of like a 2 year time horizon. So our team decided to use this method to make sense of what's happening now, and also to see what we think the 4 ways forward are to plan for, let's say, the next 12 to 24 months. The other thing that's really great about using landscape scenario planning is it's rooted in the idea that you create multiple plausible narratives of the future. So you're not just planning for a future that you want. You're not planning for a future that's simply a continuation of today. You have to think through a way to consider multiple outcomes, and they need to be pretty divergent. And you place these into really immersive stories, and they're very human centered. And in this way, you can plan in each world, immerse yourself in the driving forces of change to make strategy and create action. So, what's next? As I said, our team has been working on a set of scenarios, 4 ways forward into 2021, 2022. And I'm going to go into each one and then we'll answer a few questions. So you can see here that there are 4 very, very brief descriptions of the worlds that we might find ourselves in. The first is techno heroes, a world that is really driven by technology and accelerated adoption of a digital world. The second one is the year that woke the world. This is where 2020 serves as a wake-up call for us to re-look at all of our systems. The third is the arduous transformation. Perhaps we don't come out of the virus rapidly, but it becomes a time of inward looking and change. And then lastly, we have no real solution coming from outside of ourselves. So human innovation and coordination is the way forward. So first, in a world where privacy and anonymity are sacrificed for overall public health, what does everyday life look like? Where technology gets us out of the pandemic that we're in, how does that look? First, you could see that tech companies, big and small, step in to save the day. They're fighting the pandemic and through track and trace methods. Also, big tech steps forward with some full transparency plans to root out biased code, tamp down misinformation, and to become a bastion of elevating the truth. Technology would fuel our economic recovery because of its emerging tech acceleration. All of this might be billed to us as virtual surveillance and quickly wrapped up in something that might be like the Patriot Act 2.0. All of this data that would be gathered would enable us to certify certain safe places. And when a hotspot would maybe break out, everyone could be quickly notified. You could isolate, tamp down the virus, and then most people could go along their daily lives. You might, in this world, have some multimodal business operations where you might have one way of operating if there's a hotspot and you have to be on lockdown or a business gets closed for public occupancy. Then the other times you might be operating in your old way because it's safe to do so. I think in this world, we'd have enhanced wearables to help track our health and safety and to understand ourselves better. But in this world, our civil liberties would be in question. Across the board in this world, you would see adoption and technological advancements with AI, AR, VR, blockchain, IoT, and more. So this is a world where technology becomes the hero by helping us squash the virus, as well as root out bias code, and enables us to get back to our economic recovery. In the second world, we actually would see the virus waning, but it would leave behind a broken economy ripe for innovation. And so in this world, what does life look like? So in this world, I believe that there would be a treatment breakthrough that decelerates the virus or lessens the severity of cases. And this would enable us to really get back to our lives, except for the fact that I think that people would be very angry at how things were handled. And they would sort of believe that perhaps we didn't have to go through everything that we did. In the wake of both the pandemic and the initial energy of the activism that's been occurring since early spring, we are left with a broken economy and extremely deep cultural divides. I think in this world, you might see some calming of the bottom-up justice reform, but corporations would step up in this world because of all of the commitments that they've made over the past several months. And I believe that there would be a top to bottom change that would come from corporations and executives who are advancing diversity and inclusion issues, as well as, really embracing new leadership paradigms. Advanced corporate policies and their commitments to action will stay around in this world. So I believe this is a way that state and civic leaders would be lauded. I think you would also still continue to have federal level anti-government sentiment, a very deep divide. I think lawsuits perhaps would abound in this world as people sort through all of the things that happen to bring federal aid to people during this year. I think we would have exhausted but very well revered working class heroes. And I do think that you would still see a lot of innovation in this world because it would look like a wake up call. And this wake up call would enable us to have more pandemic preparedness, more equity, and to finally address sustainability issues. The third option is called the arduous transformation. This is a world where we would have a slow recovery that forces prolonged isolation but deep spirituality. So what would everyday life look like in this world? So in this world, we would be awaiting a vaccine or treatment, and honestly, it would feel pretty much like a Groundhog Day. I think you would see a second very, very deep wave of the virus that would basically show people that we weren't going to get out of this situation anytime soon. And people would become even more skeptical of reentry, and the economic revitalization would come in waves as well and look pretty slow and bumpy. But I do think that there are some positives in a world like this because I believe it would keep us in touch with our sense of interconnectedness. And it could also usher in a massive wave of structural changes that could redefine our social contract for both capitalism and democracy. I think, honestly, depending on the outcome of the election, this still could hold true, but depending on which way we lean, you could see a world where this would be our opportunity to have things like stakeholder capitalism, a universal income, Medicare for all, and sweeping social justice reform. But there's also a world where that might not occur. I think either way, we'll have to focus on our personal resiliency, and there will be a whole economic paradigm shift that allows us to think of resiliency in terms of our healthcare as well as our well-being, maybe even for business planning and every aspect of our recovery. The fourth world is one where we have to choreograph our human interactions in order to reclaim our lives as we know them. So in a world where people are left to their own devices to coordinate a reset and reinvigorate the economy, what does life look like in that world? So I believe to get to this particular scenario, we would not have an intervention from big tech or big pharma or maybe even corporations. This is a world where humans have to coordinate and collaborate and even improvise to lead the way through recovery and reconciliation. Ultimately, I think in this world, we'd have to adopt widespread use of PPE, a lot more social distancing for many years to come, and continue to limit large gatherings. And that could even go on for, say, up to 5 years. I think in this world, we have to communicate with each other and have human collaboration. We would have to improvise constantly as the paradigm for recovery. And you could see that traditional manufacturing businesses in this world would have to adopt sort of a legacy plus model to survive. That means they would use part of their business to do the things they've always done, but also open up entirely new business lines in order to help everyone pull together to fight both the pandemic as well as for the businesses to succeed. So I also think in this world, lots of small businesses would pivot to concierge style services, and you'd see like a complete reinvention of spaces, places, and human interaction, because we would have to have social distance design, touchless paradigms, and in this world, we would also see an enormous amount of innovation, but I see that that would be in new business models, and we'd have to really address some of the industries that otherwise could be permanently disrupted, like restaurants and food service, travel, retail, and other types of services that we are known to enjoy. So, those are the 4 different ways forward. One, where technology saves the day and gives us our world back, our sense of mobility and connection, but those technologies track our every move. And so that means we have to give up our privacy and anonymity. Another option is a year that woke the world, a year that is a wake up call that gives us an opportunity to change. There could also be the arduous transformation, something where we are together in this much longer, but we have to become more resilient and look within our small communities and our connectedness in order to transform and make our way through. Lastly, there's a world that relies on humanity, us to coordinate and choreograph our response because no one is saving the day except ourselves. So I believe that in order to think about life beyond 2020, we have to become future fluent. We have to immerse ourselves in these 4 different worlds, think about how we ourselves would live, what kind of organizations do we work for, and what are our clients' needs in these 4 scenarios. Because this is not the year for us to practice avoidance. It's the year to become future fluent. It's a time of action and a time to make the most of change. Thank you. So we have a couple of questions coming in, and I will take a chance to check some of those out in the chat. And let's see. So the first one is, which of these scenarios is the one that I think is going to come true? So, part of using this style of strategic foresight really does mean that you're trying to push each of the worlds into a very specific direction. And meaning it needs to be different enough from all of the other worlds so that your response would be different in that world. That said, you do have certain responses that work in more than one world. And that's what you're looking for. It's like your actions that would be more robust and would work no matter what future unfolds. So I say all of that to kind of pull back the curtain a little bit, because in my professional experience, whenever we've done scenario planning work, what normally happens is some aspect, and sometimes a lot of the aspects of all of the worlds come true. What you do is you monitor what's happening in the landscape as things unfold, and that helps you know which world is coming true or not. But most of the time, a little piece or part or a lot comes true from all of the scenarios you write. But the point there is that instead of trying to predict what's going to happen, a single world that might come true, you're actually prepared no matter what, and you've practiced your response. So as things unfold, you already know what you're going to do. Okay, the second question is, how do you get a skeptic on board? So when you share this type of information, I think that's probably one of the hardest questions in my entire career, because this stuff can sound pretty woo-woo, or or sometimes it's just stuff that people don't want to hear. So I've actually really been thinking about that a lot, and one of the things that I've been reading this year is a book called The Challenger Customer. Now, really, this is a sales book, but I found it to be really useful no matter what, because I think the way that we have to start approaching our interactions with skeptical people in our own business, or even, more so for us in the branding, advertising, and media businesses to convince clients, is actually to realize that we're facilitating someone to change their mental model. And you have to facilitate consensus. And what that means is you have to actually pull that conflict forward, question more, open up more conversations. And I think just consider that we're facilitating someone to really change their mind. And so I think looking at it from a psychology standpoint and a behavioral standpoint, it's a lot of facilitation of conversation. So I wish I had a silver bullet for changing people's minds, but I don't. And sometimes the skeptics can only get on board if you show them great examples, or even ask them, show them an example like the rewind to 2010 and say, what if you could have planned for these things? Did any of these things actually surprise you or your business? And if the answer is yes, then they need to consider some things that feel discontinuous now and start to plan for them. The third question was like, well, what skill do we really need right now in order to get us out of even what skill from our industry do we believe is the most powerful given all of these four scenarios? And I've actually thought a lot about that lately too. And I think that the reason why those in our industry are well positioned to bring solutions to clients and solutions to these massive issues facing us is our creativity. And I think in some ways that could sound like a cop-out to this crowd, but I really do believe that we are in a creative industry. We're creative professionals, and our creativity is what will help us move forward. And it's what we can bring to ourselves, each other, our clients, and our colleagues. And the reason also this has been so on my mind is that I have a really wonderful colleague named Dr. Natalie Nixon, and she just wrote a book called The Creativity Leap. And she and I have been talking a lot about how creativity is also what we need right now. So that also tells you a couple of books that are on my mind. I've been thinking a lot about selling in a time like this, as well as how to unlock the power of our own creativity to bring our best to solving these problems. So I hope that you've enjoyed this presentation. And if you're interested in more of this, please feel free to reach out to me personally, or you can pre-order our report for Life Beyond 2020. And this will give you a lot more detail into each one of these worlds and thinking about how to strategize your response. So thank you so much for having me today, and I hope you enjoyed this presentation.